was a most unusual game as well. Now Kramnik, it's not unusual at all to see him play flank openings, and he does that fairly often. C4, C5, so it seemed to be going around today. And indeed, it's a very solid way for black to play. So we get a symmetrical English. And, by normal means, it's hard for white to get too much out of this opening. Knight f3. Black very commonly plays the system with e5 and d6 and knight e7. Very, very solid way to play. Leko actually goes for the e6 system, which is also perfectly fine. And now Kramnik is just kind of looking for ways to do things a little bit differently. So he goes for a fianchetto of the bishop. It's more common for white to play pawn to d3 and a3 and rook b1, those type moves. But he goes with the fianchetto here. And now Kramnik is looking to gain some space with d4, which Leko prevents and also opens up his bishop. So Leko ends up playing this system with e5, this sort of Botvinnik formation, but spending extra tempo with the e-pawn, but white putting his pieces in a little unusual positions. h6 is good preparation to put the bishop on e6. And white's looking for some plans. Light squares, getting ready to play knight d5 probably, but Leko kind of beats him to it with d5, and usually this advance offers black a good play, especially because the d3 pawn is a little bit vulnerable. Rook to the c-file, and black takes the knight back, avoiding some exchanges. Knight c4. Okay, rook b8, so black maybe is going to play b5, or if not, just going to have the b pawn protected. b6. Black could probably even play b5 earlier than Leko did in this game, but for now, conservative with b6. And now Kramnik going for it with f4. And we have to say that in the last few years, he really has sharpened up his style. And he does kind of like to play these sort of complicated maneuvering games with lots of pieces on the board. So black takes that, and Kramnik recaptures with the g-pawn to bring another pawn to the center. He could take with the rook, but definitely not the e-pawn. I know a lot of players might think they want to keep their kingside pawns together, but no way you're giving up the d4 square. So gf4 seems thematic. And f5, I guess, to take away the e4 square, although black probably could play b5 right away here. Rook fd1, b5. So Leko grabbing some space. Queen f2, a move that it was not apparent to me what the point of it was right away. But certainly black can't take the pawn on d3 because knight discovery, well, actually, knight almost anywhere could even go to a safe square. The queen is just simply trapped. So queen f2, a6, guarding b5. And now, okay, so now Kramnik really takes a gamble. You got to give credit. Just putting his knight on prise to try to create some action. Now, black can take that knight. Knight takes e4. Now, I guess the point of queen e2 was that now there's no bishop tempo on the queen. For instance, bishop g4 could attack the queen, or bishop takes b3, hitting the rook and then the queen. So that's what that was about. Okay, so if this happened, let's say black takes on b2, and white, let's say white takes back, black could play bishop h3, knight c5, queen g4, for instance. Okay, white has a few pawns for the piece. Doesn't look anything spectacular. Certainly black can play this position. Maybe white could try a little finesse here to take on c5 first, so that there isn't that bishop h3, queen g4 idea. but black can play, let's say, b4 here. It's hard to say what to make of the position. White certainly has compensation. Is it a lot of compensation? Is it enough compensation? More than enough? I think black can certainly play this position. I'm not sure that Leko was exactly afraid of it. He might have just felt that he had a good position anyway and didn't need to, because he plays the move Queen A7, and that certainly looks like a sensible move because he's still attacking the knight, and the knight doesn't really have any good squares to go to. So Kramnik is now, kind of committed towards going forward. He's not going to play knight back to d2, and then black can put a rook on d8 and just consolidate a very nice position. So this idea is he's going to go forward with a temporary sacrifice. Now after d4, white is going to get the piece back because if the queen moves away, d5 with a fork. But black can take on d4 and split up white's pawns, and then we get a position that is really quite unclear. White, has some kingside weaknesses. Pawn on f4, d-pawn, strength and weakness, isolated but passed, pushing pieces back, controlling a lot of squares. Even if black takes it, he could run into some tactical problems. So Kramnik has created a dynamic position. Black is still basically okay, but Kramnik will have some problems to solve. Leko will have some problems to solve. At this point, the time was about even, but Leko, as so often he does, ended up having some problems with the clock. Queen d4 centralizing and protecting f4. Okay, black can take this pawn in a3, but I don't think that's really much of a possibility, because after knight b4 the queen is out of play, and now white gets some play. A5 can be answered by knight a6. Knight is jumping around. Not a really practical continuation for black, I think. So I'm not surprised Leko didn't grab that pawn. Rook b c8, that seems fine. So trade, I guess, to keep the d-pawn safe. Knight b4. And now the computer suggests a5, knight d3, and g5. Since black is not really going to take that pawn in f4 outright, g5 prepares to activate the bishop with bishop h5. And white probably has a little advantage in this position, though. Rook moves, I guess, to e1. And it's interesting, this knight that was on c3 went to a2, didn't look like much, but suddenly, if it comes to b4, it really jumps into play quite quickly. But the game continuation was okay. Rook d8, queen a7. And at this point, Leko has more time, but he takes most of his remaining time to play rook d7. And really a bad decision here. He trades queens, and I think that Leko occasionally does kind of look for those safe moves to get to the time control when he's short of time. But in this case, I think trading queens was a mistake, maybe drawable position, but with the clocks running down, very, very difficult. Okay, he had a couple of choices. Queen takes f4 was not such a good choice because queen takes b5. And if check and queen takes b3, rook can just move away. And black is actually running into some tactical problems. If rook takes d5, looks like a good move at first, but actually that runs into check and queen c7. And now, surprisingly, black just doesn't really have a good way to protect all his pieces, and white is flat out winning. But the good option for black here was queen to c5 check, and I think the king would go to h1, although king f1 is also possible, with the idea of covering some squares, but certainly the king is vulnerable in f1. And black can play simply king g7, covering the square, getting away from back rank checks. And even though white is a pawn up, black has some pretty good activity. Maybe not so easy to see such a continuation. Looks like actually black even has a threat of rook a7, trapping the queen.
now that King G7 is taken away the F6 square. So I think that was a good option for Leko. But after trading queens, he now really has to just try to grovel for a draw, in time pressure, and that's not an easy thing to do. Now he takes with a knight on d5. He could take with the bishop. After bishop takes d5, very interesting variation here. Knight c5, rook d6, a4. And not necessarily why either side would play these moves, but just kind of a quick computer line here. Takes. Now black is under the gun here because he's in that pin. He's got to get out of the pin. So king g7, getting out of a check so that he's ready to play rook c6 next move. So let's say bishop d5, rook d5, rook d5, trade, run. Knight takes pawn. All right, a6, knight d5. So you can still get that pawn. The knight can still come back. Check, a7, knight b6, knight c7. So black is going to have to give up his knight for the pawn. Let's say king e5. But I have the feeling that white is not going to be able to hold on to that h pawn. That black really, has 3 pawns, just needs to somehow trade off the h pawn and he gets a draw. Without going to real detailed analysis of this position, which could take some time, like to say, I think that black probably could make a draw here. But it's certainly not fun to have to calculate all this stuff. When you're short of time. So maybe Leko felt a little bit more comfortable with the pin by taking with a knight, but actually now it's a very easy position for white. He's just sticking black in this pin, and rook d4, a nice move, getting ready for knight d3, and the knight is going to go to either b4 e5. So black might be pretty close to lost after that because he's just all tangled up. And king f8, he brings the king to the middle to defend the rook. But now when the knight comes to e5, big problem. White's threatening to take the bishop and take the knight. And the knight can't move because white will trade rooks and take the bishop on f7. So black has to give up this pawn. It's kind of funny that he brought his king quickly to the middle, undefending the g-pawn. Now that he loses it, he's still kind of pinned up, and he's lost an important pawn. White is an outside passer, and it's not even easy for black to break the pin. A lot of knight moves will run into bishop c6 check. So Leko tried to untangle with this maneuver, but now Kramnik just goes into a very simple rook ending. You don't need to be Kramnik to win this rook ending. I would feel pretty confident after this move, rook d5, as white is going to win another pawn, and he does. So generally speaking, when you've got 2 healthy, protectable pass pawns like that, ahead for nothing in a rook ending, that's enough to win. And Leko just played out a couple more moves, and the rook went to b8. Clearly, black cannot win this b pawn. White can keep it protected and further activate his king, and by degrees, white will advance and win this position. I think on top of everything, the presence of the h pawns probably even helps a little bit. It's giving the white a little bit more margin for error. So really no chance Leko had of defending this endgame. So after the move rook b8, he resigned. So the rich get richer. A very good round for the leaders. Kramnik and Adams went into this round with the lead, and they both won, meaning that they're off to great starts at 4-1, and they're now a point and a half ahead of the field. A group including Wang Hao, Neidich, and Meyer, followed by Caruana, Leko, Friedman, and Hankin, all at -1. And finally, Andreykin, after half out of the first 4, has won a game and still finds himself in last place. So there you have it from Dortmund, and we, of course, will have continuing Game of the Day coverage until the conclusion of this event. So continue to check in daily for that coverage. In any case, I hope that you enjoyed the the games today. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, and